Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are going to take a look at the Hungarian AMD-65. That is the automatic modernized paratrooper model of 1965. This is one of the most distinctive AKs to come out of the Cold War Eastern Bloc. I think it's a really cool gun. And it's high time that we talked about it in some detail. Now, it just happens that yesterday, we launched the Kickstarter campaign for Headstamp Publishing's most recent book entitled Rifles on the Danube, Hungarian AK Pattern Firearms 1959 to 2002. We're running that Kickstarter for 2 weeks, and it is, without any doubt, the best source of information on Hungarian AKs and the military context and the production context surrounding them. Nothing better than it is written right now. I don't think anything better ever will be written. And so today's video is brought to you by that book. That's where I got the information for this video. And if you're interested in Hungarian firearms, you should definitely pause the video, hit the description text, click on the link to our Kickstarter campaign, and check out that book, because if you like this, you'll definitely like that book. Anyway, the story of the AMD-65 begins in 1964 when the Hungarian Ministry of the Interior decided that it wanted a new compact rifle. To give a little context to this, the Hungarian military had just fairly recently adopted the AKM-63. This is basically sort of your standard stamped receiver AKM. Looks rather like this. And it's a good rifle, but a significant portion of Hungarian troops were in positions where they could really use something more compact. In field exercises, there were a lot of mechanized infantry guys, there were a lot of tank crewmen, who could really make better use of a more compact gun with, say, a folding stock on it. In addition, the Ministry of the Interior in particular had some police units, some special operations units, there were paratroopers, some support troops, a lot of people who could make use of a more compact weapon. This is officers, by the way, as well. Instead of the World War II era thing of officers getting submachine guns, well, this is now the 1960s. We're in the Cold War. Officers are going to get the compact assault rifle, an AMD-65. So anyway, in 64, the Ministry of the Interior orders FEG, the main Hungarian weapons factory, to come up with a smaller, lighter version of the gun. They want something that's going to be 30% shorter than the AKM-63, 10% lighter. It's going to use a 20-round magazine instead of 30 rounds to, again, keep it compact and help keep it a bit lighter. But beyond those requirements, they wanted it to remain as standardized with the AK as possible. The handling, the training should all be as close as possible. Parts interchangeability where possible. By March of 1965, FEG has a prototype ready. However, there is some reorganization going on at the factory around this time, and that would slow down the development process here. So they had their first prototype ready in March of 65. It wasn't until September of that year that they had 25 of them, enough to actually do some testing and trials. Those trials will run through April of 1966. Everything's turning out pretty well. They have a simplified version of a folding buttstock here. We'll touch on this when we take a closer look at the gun. They've shortened the barrel, they've given it a muzzle brake. We'll talk about that as well. A batch of 380 guns are made for field trials in early 1968. Those go quickly and go well. The gun's approved for full-on production, in particular for the Ministry of the Interior. And by August of 1968, the guns are actually seeing field use, because that's when Hungarian forces are part of the occupation of Czechoslovakia, the Prague Spring, like a whole big hullabaloo inside the Eastern Bloc, and Hungary sends troops as part of the occupation force, and some of those troops, in particular, units like the Revolutionary Police Regiment, have AMD-65s. And they report back that they like the guns. Things work well. I don't know how many people they were actually shooting, but they're carrying the guns in combat. They're using them in armored vehicles. That's what these guns are made for, and they perform well in those circumstances. Now, just shortly thereafter, when we get to 1969, comes the big surprise of the AMD-65 development process, and that is when the Ministry of Defense, so we've got a distinction here between the Ministry of the Interior that originally pushes the development of these, and the Ministry of Defense, who run the main big army and the reserves and, you know, mobilization in case of World War III sort of stuff. Well, in 1969, the Ministry of Defense decides to adopt the AMD-65 for everybody, for the entire army. It'll be the standard infantry service rifle. It's the gun that's going to go to the reservists as well. And it's surprising here because this is not a gun that's intended to be an standard infantry rifle. This is a specialist gun. This is for paratroopers and mechanized infantry and really the high-speed, low-drag elites, the officers. And then some of the second echelon guys who just don't need full-on infantry rifles. Well, so why did they adopt this as a standard rifle? Classic Army thing, it's cheaper. In fact, the AMD-65 is apparently almost 50% the cost of a regular AKM-63. So they're saving a tremendous amount of money. Because another thing to remember about Hungary here is they wanted to manufacture full mobilization worth of rifles in advance. The main weapons production centers like FEG were considered to be dangerously close to the Hungarian borders, and they couldn't count on being able to make more guns in case of war and foreign troops occupying Hungary. So they wanted everything in advance. So they're making a lot of guns. AMD-65 is simply the way to save some money. So when this comes into service with the regular army, it's not really regarded quite as well as it was with the specialist troops who initially got issued them, because there's a lot of guys out there who are just plain infantry. They're reservists. They liked having a real buttstock that you could get a nice cheek weld on and actually shoot well. They liked having the longer barrel, which was substantially quieter than this very blasty short barrel and muzzle brake. So the gun will serve. Its reputation kind of depends on who's actually using it. So anyway, well, let's take a closer look. Let me show you some of the other differences between the AMD-65 and a regular AKM. First and foremost, the job of the AMD-65 was to be short and compact, and it certainly does pull that off, largely because of its folding stock. Now, you look at this and you might think, why didn't Hungary, they made their own version of folding stock here, and frankly, it's not that great. This wire, by the way, the release mechanism is a button right here on the bottom. Push that up and it unlocks the stock. It's fairly stiff there. There we go. And that allows us to unfold it into the extended position there. This does not give one a good cheek weld. It's actually a pretty terrible cheek weld, especially in fully automatic, and this is a select. Well, the original AMD-65s are select fire. This one is semi-automatic only. It's a US semi-auto build. But why would the Hungarians use a stock like this, which has obvious shortcomings, when there are other proven stock designs already available, namely the Russian underfolding design? Well, the Hungarians did actually have a small number of underfolding AKs they got from Russia, and they discovered that, first off, those stocks are relatively complicated to make. There's a lot of bending machinery involved, bending tooling involved, a lot of parts to them. They're expensive, and they come loose. And that's something that I think anyone who's done a substantial amount of shooting with underfolding AKs will recognize, is that those stocks get loose and wobbly, kind of like the MP40s before them that they were modeled on. And so the Hungarians wanted to avoid that. They wanted a stock that would stay nice and tight, and so they designed one that certainly does that. It's also inexpensive, it's compact, it does everything except provide a really good natural cheek weld, and that was a compromise they were willing to make. The butt plate is topped with a little bit of a rubber butt pad. Not really so much for recoil absorption, but to give it a little stickiness so it doesn't slide off the shoulder. And there is also a little rubber tab right here on the top corner so that when the stock folds, it doesn't damage the receiver there. Now, when it comes to the barrel, they cut the barrel down by about 4 inches to make it shorter. It's 98 millimeters shorter than a standard AKM barrel. But that did increase felt recoil between that and the lighter weight overall with some of the removed parts, like not bothering with an upper handguard. And in order to counteract the increased recoil, they went ahead and put this muzzle brake on it. That brake is a compromise as well. It makes the gun noticeably louder. I think it was 5 to 8 decibels louder than without the brake, but it does, according to Hungarian studies, reduce the felt recoil by about 30%, which is pretty substantial. Now, it's a little questionable here how useful this combination of features was, because if we compare a standard length AKM with the AMD-65, yeah, you've cut the barrel down by 4 inches, but then you've extended it back out another 3. So you actually end up with only about an inch shorter of a gun than they had on the standard AKMs. Now, of course, it's the folding buttstock that really makes a difference for compactness, but one does kind of wonder if they'd have been better off just sticking with a 16-inch barrel, not needing the brake, not having the extra volume from shooting, literal ear bleeding volume, and taking that route. But anyway, they didn't. For a front grip, they simply took the exact same pistol grip that was used on the regular back end of the rifle, flipped it around 180 degrees so it angles forward so that you have room to clear a magazine. And these will, by the way, take 30-round mags as well. So there's a 30. It's tight, but it does fit in there. Just barely clears. That's how they positioned this front grip, is so that it would just barely clear a 30-round mag. But you can actually see the cutaway right there, which is the cut to allow space for the trigger guard. So the pistol grips are literally identical. They just flip the front one around. They give it a stamped sheet metal handguard. It doesn't have to insulate at all because you're holding it down here by the grip. Again, you don't need any insulation because you're not holding the gun up here, so they just left off the upper handguard. That saves weight and it also saves cost. Where the regular Hungarian AKMs, the full-length ones, had rear sights that went out to 1,000 meters, the AMD-65 only goes out to 800. The shorter barrel was seen as restricting its maximum effective range, although frankly 800 meters is still way beyond any useful range of an iron-sighted AK. The overall gas system of the gun has been shortened. So if we again compare this with our standard AKM, you can see the gas block positions here. This gas block is a little bit forward of the AMD-65s. As a result, the gas tube is shorter, the gas piston is shorter. Technically speaking, the operating parts of the AMD-65 are 4.7% lighter than those of a regular AKM. However, the gas port is the exact same diameter. They did not change that. There were a couple different variations on pistol grips that were used on the AMD-65s. The very first ones were actually sort of a light bluish color. Those proved to be a bit too brittle in cold weather. They replaced them with a more durable plastic, which is what we have here. Later on, these were replaced in production by wooden, steamed beechwood pistol grips. Same design, and it is a distinctively Hungarian design. In fact, the wooden pistol grip is that. So that's what they were eventually replaced with. Between 93 and 97, AMD-65s in Army service were all overhauled and were all given wooden pistol grips. So guns that remained in military service for Hungary all got wooden grips. The ones that were in the Ministry of the Interior Service did not. We have very little in the way of trunnion marks on the Hungarian AKs, but there will be a 1 or 2 letter prefix on the serial number, and that can tell you, if you have our new book on Hungarian AKs, that'll tell you exactly who the gun was made for. So this is BR. This was made for the Ministry of Interior Police. Their guns did not get overhauled, and that's why this remains with its plastic pistol grips after being surplus to the US and cut up as a parts kit before being rebuilt for me as this semi-auto. The one other marking I'll show you here are the selector marks. These are always usually a little bit different on every country's AKs. For Hungary, they have a little infinity symbol for full auto and a 1 for semi-auto. Disassembly is exactly the same as every other standard AK. So push in the recoil spring, take off the dust cover. You can take out the recoil spring. You can take out the bolt and bolt carrier. The internals here, again, exactly the same as regular AKs. The receivers, exactly the same dimensions. But if we compare the AMD-65 bolt carrier and piston to a regular AKM one, you can see while the bolt carrier is the same, the gas piston is slightly shorter, and that's where the reduction in operating parts weight comes from. Proper mass production of the AMD-65 for the Army begins in 1969, and it would run until 1980. The gun remained in production after that until 1990, being manufactured for commercial and export sales, but by 1980, they'd produced enough to fully equip the Hungarian Army. Total production here, we're talking 1.068 million rifles. This accounted for 56.5% of all Hungarian Kalashnikov rifle production. So if you see these a lot compared to other Hungarian AK patterns, that's the reason. They actually made more of these than, well, there were more of these made than every other AK pattern in Hungary put together. So they continued to serve with the Hungarian military for a very long time. They were exported. A lot of these were exported, and they were exported in a couple different ways. One of the groups was just semi-automatic rifles exported to the United States. More commonly, especially earlier on, starting in 1970, they exported guns to like socialist revolutionary groups basically at cost with no extra profit margin. Examples would be a bunch went to Cuba, a bunch went to Vietnam, sort of the revolutionary brothers of the Hungarian communists would get cheap AMD-65s. And then there were a lot of other friendly nations who weren't trying to promulgate socialist revolution, and they were happy to sell guns to those guys as well. Countries like, for example, Egypt and Iraq bought AMD-65s. So you still see these extensively around the world in conflict zones. Like even as recently as 2005, the US Army bought 45,000 AMD-65s specifically to equip the Afghan National Police. Plus, by the way, another 39,000 that same year that were donated by Hungary. So the Afghan police got nearly 100,000 of these rifles, which is actually a significant portion of their overall production. But you see them still around the world today. So we got a lot of parts kits for these into the US a number of years ago, so they're not that uncommon here. Most of the time, of course, you see them with 16-inch barrels. This one was beautifully built for me by the AK guy and Brandon Herrera, so big thanks to them for helping me out with this one. I've wanted an AMD-65 for a while. And this is a completely original parts kit, new receiver, but original barrel still, beautifully done. Exactly like the original factory production guns, just semi-automatic. So if you would like to know more about Hungarian AKs, I strongly recommend you check out our Kickstarter pre-launch for Rifles on the Danube by Laszlo Betts. It is a fantastic source of information on all Hungarian AKs, including the AMD-65. Check it out. We've got a couple of different versions of the book, a bunch of cool stretch goals, bonus extras, and fun things to check out. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.